Welcome, and in this video course we are looking at the CyberOps Associate version 1 course. This course is going to cover the skills and knowledge needed for successfully handling the tasks and duties, responsibilities of an associate level security analyst working at a security operations center. The goal of this video series is to help prepare learners for the Cisco 200-201 certification that's focusing on understanding the Cisco Cybersecurity Operation Fundamentals course known as CBROPS. Welcome, Module 1, the dangers to the network. So we're going to be looking at why we have to do this, some basic war stories. We're going to be looking at threat actors and what they are. That includes the motivations, kind of why they're doing specific things, and we're going to look at the threat impact. And again, threat impact, we're looking at potential impact, not always direct impact. Because keep in mind, the goal is to mitigate the threats so that they're not actually realized. That's why we discuss things in potential as opposed to actually occurring. So first off, some basic war stories. One of the fun ones is this hijacked people. And essentially, hackers can set up rogue wireless networks, for example. You're at Starbucks, you connect to the Wi-Fi. Are you really connecting to the Starbucks Wi-Fi, or are you connecting to a rogue wireless network that is mimicking Starbucks Wi-Fi? So this is actually known as an evil twin, and this is actually fairly simple to do. You have a lot of networking devices on the market today that do this. So when we're talking technical ability, it used to be a little higher to do these types of attacks, but not necessarily. So what's the purpose of an evil twin? Well, if you actually connect to an evil twin instead of the original network, and again, you probably won't even realize it's an evil twin, everything that you do can be monitored, could be stripped. So even HTTPS sessions can have the encryption stripped from the data so that it can be readable. So we have to be extremely careful what we are doing. Now granted, not all instances of SSL can be stripped. A lot of them can, not all of them. So you have to be a little more careful when you're at Starbucks. Maybe not check your banking. Maybe not check specific financial backing options. You're on Facebook. See, I'd be concerned with that, because if someone is actually able to gain access to my social media, would that cause an issue? And if the answer is yes, you probably don't want to be checking that with open Wi-Fi. So another danger is ransomed companies. So it is a growing concern when you have companies that are lured to open attachments to have infections that will hold their devices ransom, typically called ransomware. And essentially it will encrypt everything and it will force the user or the business to pay a ransom. It's really interesting because ransomware has been around for a number of years, and we're starting to see more and more concern with ransomware. And we're also seeing ransomware kind of shift. A few years ago, 60 Minutes did a great special on a small county, I think in Oklahoma, that had ransomware. The ransom was 10 grand. The mayor was like, we can't afford that. We could pay you 5 grand. The ransomware group was like, okay. They took 5 grand, unlocked everything, and moved forward. Because some money was better than no money in that situation. However, in that same 60-minute episode, a larger city had a $2 million ransom. They had the money, but they refused to pay it, because if they paid it, then it would promote individuals to keep doing this. So the large city was like, no, we're not going to pay it. And they lost data for years. They lost security camera footage. They lost dash cam footage from police. I mean, they lost a lot of information. So with ransomware, some companies are paying, some companies are not paying. It really just depends on, can you survive without that data? Or can you survive with paying the ransom? And those are things that are growing in concern, and they're not an easy answer. It's not as cut and dry as don't pay because you will keep encouraging this. If you don't have your data, can you operate? Simple as that. Another huge issue is these targeted nations. So when we look at key infrastructure, power, water, those are key infrastructure, transit. All of this should have a certain level of security. But the question is, do they? Power plants actually have already been shown that they can be taken down with malware. We've seen that malware such as Stuxnet worm, which was introduced to a non-networked, or was introduced to a power plant or power grid through a USB device that then ultimately led to the crash of a power plant. Basically, the software was designed to jump from machine to machine until it reached a programmable logic controller, a PLC. And from the PLC, it took down very specific critical systems for that power plant. However, you see the same thing in water. Where I come from, in Northern California, we've actually seen that our water pumps are susceptible to ransomware attacks. And people may think, well, what's the big deal if we turn off a water pump here or there? Well, in some large cities, the water pumps control fresh water to everyone's homes. So if you can imagine a city like LA or Las Vegas having water pumps turned off or reduced, how quickly would the water dry up in those cities? In LA, I think rough estimates were 5 days. In Vegas, rough estimates were, if key water systems were compromised, less than 3 days. Granted, these issues have been addressed by DHS in recent audits, but before those audits, those two large cities were critical. I mean, that water pump could have accidentally killed, hundreds of thousands of people if they were infected. So key infrastructure is definitely being targeted. And we've seen that because our infrastructure is very vulnerable. Not just the water system, not just the power grid, not just infrastructure like roadways, train systems, transit systems. All of those are being targeted for disruption. So, in our course, we do actually have a video discussing the anatomy of an attack. And essentially, this is what's known as a kill chain. So the kill chain can be broken down into a few different steps. In a very basic model, we have a 4-step process for a cyber attack: reconnaissance, attack, expansion, obfuscation. Basically, you do some recon, you figure out where you can attack them, you attack them, and you expand once you have attacked and gained access. Once you have expanded, you can start obfuscating what you're doing. Hide your tracks. That is the general agreed upon anatomy. However, we can dive a lot deeper in those types of attacks than just 4 steps. That is the general model that most organizations use. However, there have been a lot more research done in a 7-phase attack instead. Reconnaissance is always going to be the beginning. Except here we take the attack phase and we break it down to 2 additional phases: weaponization and delivery. Essentially, you do the reconnaissance, you figure out what is what, how things are associated, how things are vulnerable, what systems there are, what operating systems there are, and you can weaponize that information. If you know they are running a unpatched version of Windows Server 2012. Well, you can weaponize that information. You can craft an exploit that will be able to exploit that system. The third step, again, that after weaponization, is that delivery. Now that you know what exploit to run, you can figure out ways to deliver that exploit to that target. The delivery could be an email, could be infecting a website, could be sending a phishing, could be social engineering. It could be as simple as calling a secretary and saying that you're your boss's boss and that you need her to look at an email. Again, that's going to be more of a phishing email, but you can deliver the malware in multiple ways. So after you've done the delivery, the exploitation portion will happen. The exploit has been delivered, it needs to be executed without being detected. So that's why phishing emails are becoming more popular. Most organizations still lack decent phishing user training. Some organizations are actually doing proper training, but most are not. So after the exploit has ran, we have a command and control. That's phase 5. Essentially, once the exploit has been executed, the exploit should then communicate with the threat actor to figure out what to do next, to download newer versions of malware, to run certain scripts, or to expand, or lots of other options. And that is done through a command and control server. Once that actually occurs, phase 6 will be internal reconnaissance. Again, we're doing reconnaissance again. They may start looking to see what is internal, what networks are available, what workstations are available. In order to move lateral through the organization, you need to have a decent map of the infrastructure. How do the different devices connect to one another? Are there networks inside of networks? Are there systems inside systems? We're not quite sure, so that's why that internal reconnaissance has to take place. Are there internal security measures? Is there an IPS? Is there an IDS? Is there a network for IoT or PLC-based devices? Not quite sure. That's why that reconnaissance is so important. The last step is maintain and obfuscate. Hide your track and stay as long as possible. The deeper you dig inside the network, the harder it is for them to remove you or find you. Things like being able to install rootkits in very specific files is a great way for things not to be able to detect you. Also with rootkits, we could have a slave of computers. Slave zombies can actually slowly build a bot network or a bot kit. Bot network is just a bunch of slave computers that can do whatever the command and control server says. These are all ways that a cyber attack can move forward. And again, this is not a complete list. Like, this kill chain is ever evolving, ever changing, because these steps are always being modified and refined for easier attackability. So the important part is, why do hackers do this? Gain information, gain data, because they're mad at a company. There's a huge list. It could be that you're being paid to do this for some reason. The reason hackers do what they do is a pretty long list. A threat actor is typically defined as a malicious actor, also known as a threat actor, that is an entity that is partially or wholly responsible for a security incident that impacts or has the potential to impact an organization's security. Oftentimes, threat actors come in 4 main flavors. They are going to be cybercriminal, like hackers, hacktivists, state-sponsored attackers, or possible insider threats. Those are the main 4 types of threat actors. That is not a complete list, that's just the main. I did this before going to the next slide because as days go by, everything changes. Cisco defines 5 major groups: hacktivists, organized crime hackers, state sponsors, terrorist groups, but they're also now including amateurs. So amateurs are going to be anyone that doesn't have any real skill that is able to compromise security, like a script kiddie. So kind of what are their purposes? Again, amateurs, script kiddies, they use built-in tools and they have basic understanding how to do things, so they can still be pretty dang devastating to a business, even though their skill level is relatively low. Hacktivists are hackers who publicly protest against a reason, and they use that ideological difference and they're actually targeting individuals opposed to that difference. They could be posting articles, videos, leaking information. For example, just an example, let's say that I'm against cosmetics that use animal testing. I'm targeting a company that says they don't use animals, but I know they do because I broke into their server and I have video footage showing them using animals for testing. I post their internal videos online. That'd be an example of a hacktivist. And they can do this so many different ways. They could be hacking, they could be just straight using DDoS, denial of services, to disrupt an organization's ability to function. Another thing is financial gain. A lot of what hackers do is because they're getting paid. It may not be because I'm philosophical against what you're doing. It could just be because I'm getting paid to do job or task X, and I need to make rent this month, so I do it. So motivated by financial gain is a huge part. Cybercriminals want to gain access to information, banking information, medical information, things that can be leveraged to generate cash. That's always a huge portion of why hackers hack, is to generate funding. That is not the only reason. For some hackers, they want to prove that they can do it. For some other hackers, they want to make money. There is private information, intellectual property, IP out there, trade secrets that should be protected. At times, some nation states may disagree with that intellectual property being private, so they target and publicly announce what that IP is. So again, other countries could also interfere with political systems, can influence other political systems. They may be interested in industrial sabotage. I may want to go into the wind turbine industry, but I don't want to do the R&D. I maybe go to the same industry but a different organization, commit industrial espionage or cyber espionage to steal their plans. I make a knockoff version of it and sell that. I actually don't have to spend as much money doing R&D, so I actually can sell my product cheaper. That's a great example of espionage that's pretty dang common. Basically, the theft of intellectual property is a huge part of why some organizations do commit espionage. Intellectual property is actually a billion-dollar industry each year. If I have the recipe to make product X, or I've got the plans to make product Y, and if you can steal them, then you don't have to put as much R&D, which means you can run cheaper. So intellectual property theft is a huge growing business and a huge growing concern. Again, these are not a list of every reason. This is just a brief overview of main reasons why individuals hack and kind of the different groups of hackers and why they hack. So earlier we talked about IoT and PLCs. Well, IoT is also known as Internet of Things, and these IoT devices basically help individuals connect things to improve quality of life. Could be a smart light, could be a smart refrigerator, could be a smart garage door opener, things of that nature. These types of devices connect to the internet and they're not always updated. So that is why some of them become a gateway into the network. Threat actors actually prey on these devices because they create opportunities for the threat actor to enter a network. We have another lab researching and analyzing IoT application vulnerabilities. Again, labs are done in a separate video. Last major section are threat impacts. What is the purpose of the threat? How does it impact the organization? So there's a key set of information that organizations want to protect. PII, personal identifiable information. That's one of the big ones. This is any information that can be used to positively identify an individual. Name and address, name and phone number, name and social security, birth date, credit card numbers, things of that nature. Cybercriminals definitely try to obtain lists of PII so that they could steal people's identities. That's one of the big ones. Or they can use this PII to create fake accounts, fake bank records, or to open up legitimate bank accounts and then withdraw it, or open up legitimate credit card lines and then not pay them, or loans, or things of that nature. We also have protected health information, PHI, and that's typically a subset of PII. We have a growing digital system of medical records in the US, and these are typically electronic medical records, EMR-based systems. The EMR-based systems protect the PHI. And this is going to be procedures, this is going to be anything medical done by an individual. Well, to an individual, not by the individual. Doctors do the actual procedures. So PII, PHI, and then we have personal security information. This is another common type of PII, and this includes usernames, passwords, any security question responses or challenge responses, any information that an individual can use to pretend to be someone else. These are all main areas that can be targeted and compromised. So who cares if someone steals PII or PHI or PSI? Well, all of these, one, are expected to be protected, but individuals that have PII with a organization, and that organization has the ability to leverage that PII as a competitive advantage. So, breach of PII or PHI or PSI can result in the organization losing their competitive advantage. If you go to a hospital and you know that hospital is constantly leaking out your PII, you're less likely to go to that hospital. So the protection of the information about you is that organization's competitive advantage. We're going to ignore the fact that certain level or expected levels of privacy are mandates, like PHI is protected by FERPA. FERPA's educational records is protected by HIPAA. If you're in a school and your grades are not protected, that's a violation of FERPA. If you are dealing with financial information, there are compliances guarding financial information. If you are an organization storing credit card information and there's a breach there, that's a PCI DSS violation. So, certain types of data are protected by industry or by state and federal laws or country laws. So any types of breach in that could lead to that loss of competitive advantage. That means loss of intellectual property to a competitor. Again, we talked about that earlier about industrial espionage and how the competitor can now improve their product without having to pay for the R&D that your organization paid for. Other concerns are loss of trust or faith in that organization, meaning or individuals no longer want to go to that organization, so that organization eventually will fail. Other threat impacts could be political or national security. It's not just businesses getting hacked, governments getting hacked all the time. In the news in the last several years, how many federal organizations have had data breaches? IRS is one of the big ones, but it's not the only one. State-supported hackers are causing disruptions and destruction over digital services. In the UK, you've actually had hackers target UK internet providers to shut down the internet in portions of the UK. In Eastern Europe, same thing. When you have hackers that disagree with what the government's doing, hackers take down infrastructure. The internet has become essential as medium for commercial businesses, for financial activities, for banking, for infrastructure, for users, for sharing of information. All of that's done through the internet. So, with a disruption of internet services, it could actually devastate an organization. It could devastate a country. If a business loses internet, it could be their complete cutoff from the world. They may not be able to purchase things or sell things or connect with their vendors or consumers. If a country is cut off from the internet, that means everyone in the country, individuals, consumers, businesses, government, all cut off from the outside world, and that definitely can destroy a country's economy. Another lab, visualizing black hats. So let's go ahead and summarize what we learned. In this module, we learned about threat actors, how they function, why they do what they do. We looked at IoT, we looked at different types of information, PII, PHI, PSI, and why those are areas of concern. We talked about overall kill chain structure. And that is it for this lecture. If you have any questions or concerns, please